Hey guys, welcome back to another episode here with me. I'm so honored to have Karolina Kuras join us today because when I saw her photography, I died. So I'm thrilled that she joined us today. She is a Polish-born, Toronto-based photographer, and she specializes in ballet photography. So she works with dancers, companies, and publications around the world. She's literally traveling everywhere. This includes the National Ballet of Canada, the English National Ballet, and the Royal Ballet. And she pairs ballet, fashion, and fine arts, and she creates one-of-a-kind images, which you need to check out on her Instagram page. Once in a while, it's so important to tune in and listen to inspiring stories of people living out their dream life and how they got there, because it only inspires in us the action and the commitment and the discipline to really get and build our dreams. So Caro is no exception. She is where she is because of hard work and determination. I think her story will really inspire you. Join us as we dive deeper into her story. Caro, I am so excited to have you here. It's truly an honor. I absolutely love your photography. It just takes me somewhere else, and I can just feel the movement in every shot that you take. And the moment I saw them, I was like, I have to interview this woman. She's remarkable. So thank you so much for being here. It's truly, truly a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. And
that's so exciting. So I'd love to jump right in with asking you, one of the things you mentioned was that photography and ballet have been forms of communication for you. So can you walk us through and tell us a little bit more about this? Like, how are they portals or expressions out to the world?
For me, I think both of them. I was super shy growing up, and so language wasn't my first communication choice, but I came to life when I was dancing, and then photography also gave me kind of a license to be out in the world and interact with people and have something to talk about and share and connect with others. So yeah, they were both kind of a way for a shy gal to express herself and connect with the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. And with your work, do you have a mission that leads you forward, that kind of keeps you going? Is there like a personal mission behind all of this?
All for the love of dance and photography, and just, I think I've said this before, but just when I watch a dance performance that moves me, my whole goal is to capture any little essence of that feeling in a photograph. And you know, it's not possible because it's a moving art and it's a live performance, but just to capture like a little bit of that feeling is always the goal.
There must be a lot of emotion behind that, because you must get excited about the shot that you're about to take. So that's really, really neat. So I'd also actually really want to point out that you're also a self-taught. So I'm always fascinated by people that reached a level of mastery, just like you have, on their own, by their own passion and discipline. And so I'm curious, what do you feel like it took for you to get to this level? Like, what was that journey like?
I've always been very passionate and eager about things, so I tend to dive in head first and just keep rolling with things. So yeah, I get pretty obsessed with things. So it was dance for the first chunk of my life, was the obsession, and then photography kind of took over. So for me, it was just, once I'm on a track, I just keep rolling and
You're like, I'm going
just full speed ahead. And I'm very good at agreeing to do things that I'm not qualified to do, and then having to figure them out. So yeah, that's always been it's sure I can do that, and then, oh crap, how do I do?
Yeah, but that's amazing to just throw yourself in there and just be like, all right, swimming in the deep end, you figure it out as you're going. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because if I had understood correctly, like you mentioned that when you were a young girl, you had actually dreamt of becoming a ballerina. And obviously now I'm interviewing you as a photographer. So there was a shift there. And I'm curious, like at what moment, or was there a defining moment that made the shift for you, that you were like, I actually need to take it over here?
Yeah, with dance, it felt like it kind of petered out when I decided I didn't want to pursue it as a career. And then I know with photography, I just had a teacher that in high school, as part of the class we were doing, kind of just saw something in me, and I didn't really consider it as a career at that point. And he just kind of gave me a little push and said, "You're doing this." Signed me up for a co-op. He was great. He didn't really give me a choice. He was just like, "Here you go. This is what you're going to do. This is what I recommend." And before that, I hadn't really thought about it. And then I was placed with a photographer, and that kind of took over. And yeah, before that, it was just taking pictures of my friends with my parents' camera, which I sort of stole, borrowed.
Took with permission, right? Yeah.
Yes, totally.
That's amazing. Have you ever gone back to that teacher and been like, "Thank you"?
Yeah.
The one that signed you up to the co-op.
Oh yeah, we had dinner like quite a few years back after I had a fully established career in that town, and got to thank him, and it was really lovely. I should probably reach out again, but yeah, he was wonderful, and definitely kind of like the inspiration that you need when you're kind of a lost teenager trying to figure out your life, to just get a kick in the right direction really helps, because honestly at that moment I don't think it would have maybe materialized into anything without that push. So.
Wow, beautiful, eh? How different people in our lives just sometimes they change our life forever, and sometimes they're just someone that that's incredible. So I want to talk a little bit about you as a little girl. I know that you have Polish roots, and you also had a very unique upbringing from what I've understood. So I'd love to shed a bit more light into your childhood and what was that like for you, particularly just before you moved to Canada. So describe to us, who was Caro as a little girl? Like, what did she dream of becoming? What was your role?
A ballerina. She wanted to be a ballerina. So we immigrated to Canada when I was 5. I was born in Poland. We lived in the mountains, and my parents were big hippies, and they're also Buddhists. So they lived in an old mill with their friends who are all like-minded hippie Buddhists as well. And they meditated and had monks come and do teaching. So it was beautiful community vibe, but also a nice contrast to the rest of the country, because it was socialist at the time, basically communist, and there were food rations, and it wasn't the best time. So they found a way to kind of shelter us and themselves from that life and live. So it was like a 500-year-old mill that we all lived in, and each family had one room, and then there was a big communal kitchen and shared bathrooms. And yeah, I spent pretty much my first 5 years with a flower crown on my head running through the mountains with my hippie artist family and their friends. So yeah, it was
my God,
definitely not the normal childhood.
No, even just like from just looking at Poland, like the fact that it was communist, and you're right, it was food rations, to being part of and being raised in a hippie community, or like in this like secluded community that is full of art. And so how do you actually think that plays a role to who you are today? Like, do you still see parts of that come up for you?
Oh yeah, hippie Caro still has to stay away from the she has to stay away from the paisley dresses shop. I'm just like
naturally gravitated to it.
Yeah, and I think it also just instilled that artist mentality. Like for both of my parents, art was above all other aspirations and job. So I was always very encouraged in the arts and music. And we had like one of my early inspirations for photography, which is my parents had a dark room, and my uncle took beautiful photos too. So there were photo books everywhere, and I was just immersed in that. My dad's a musician, my mom's a painter. So it was a very arty upbringing.
That's beautiful though. So then what led to you guys moving to Canada? Because it was your whole family that moved, right?
Yeah, so my dad was part German, so he got a visa to go visit family in Germany, and then he defected and moved to Canada where one of my uncles lived. And then the government in Poland, they kind of punish families if someone defects. So it took my dad 2 years to get the rest of us out. So we were without him for 2 years before we could finally
Oh, yeah.
Migrate to Canada, and then communism fell like 3 years later. So yeah.
So those were probably really intense years for you guys, I can imagine. How old were you when you moved to Canada then? Like,
I was 5.
oh my gosh, you were young. You remember
Yeah,
your
I have
before that?
the most vivid memories of my childhood in Poland, and then from 6, 7, 8, like in Toronto, I don't have that much. It
That's
wasn't as,
nice. Hmm.
yeah, it didn't feel as bright and memorable, I guess. So I feel like my memory just kind of wiped it.
Oh my goodness. So then you moved to which part of Canada?
To
Because
Toronto, and just not the best part of Toronto.
okay.
A bit of a rough neighborhood, but also we never knew that we were poor, or because in Poland things were so hard, it was almost impossible for a family to get an apartment. So the 4 of us living in one room, that was normal. That
Yeah.
was how families lived. And then when my dad left, we lived in like basically a bachelor apartment with my grandma, the 4 of us. So when we
Mhm.
moved to Toronto into a 1-bedroom apartment, the 4 of us were like, what? We're rich. We have our own apartment. We never really realized
Wow.
until we got older, and then we were like, yeah, that's not how most people live.
The contrast must have been, yeah, for because you're right. When you're there, you have really no point of comparison or even perspective. So, and it seemed like a beautiful community, like this old
Yeah.
mill. Everybody had. Wow, that's actually really really interesting. So then, can you tell us a little bit about your life? So you obviously you were quite young. So I assume the first couple of years was a lot of adapting. And luckily, when you're that young, perhaps it was an easier transition. Did you find you adapted quickly to Canada, or was it difficult?
It was difficult. We went from like living in the mountains in this picturesque town that is so stunning. We went back last year for the first time. The old mill that we grew up in
Mhm.
was actually converted to a bed and breakfast, so we could stay in the actual building, which was amazing. And yeah, just picturesque, beautiful town, lots of community, to Toronto, Jane and Finch area, which is just known to be like one of the worst
Yeah.
neighborhoods. It's pretty rough, and it was just so ugly, and like just
Mhm.
big, tall apartment buildings. And yeah, definitely a bit of a shock to the system. And I just remember thinking, this is such a horrible place.
Like, why
And
did we move? Yeah.
yeah, and not being able to speak the language was really
Mhm.
hard and painful at first, because I was just old enough to be totally fluent. So for my sister who was younger, it was an easy switch because she was thrown into school learning English where I was not. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's true. The older we get, sometimes the more difficult it gets, like when you're young. Which is also why I was so impressed that you could actually remember so vividly your childhood.
We
So
also
then,
moved to a smaller town. So we moved from
ah,
Toronto to a smaller town to, yeah, a place where we had our own house. And yeah.
yeah, which must have been nice for you because then you were probably like, oh, it's probably a little more relaxing.
Yeah, it was nice. It was like a really
Yeah.
good, safe little pocket of the world. So
Mm.
yeah.
So then, why don't we get into a little bit about how your photography career blossomed from that point where you started to take the course? Because I assume that's actually where you started to take it more seriously. Is that where it started
Yeah.
to kind of blossom for you?
Yeah, I got my first camera when I was like 11. I still have it. It's a little Polaroid like pop-up, and they just started
Oh,
making
nice.
film for it again. So I'm pretty excited. I'm like, take all my money. Let's do this.
That's awesome.
But oh yeah, my parents had a nice SLR camera that I would borrow without permission all the time, that my dad eventually gave me as a present. Like after a few years, he
Mm.
said, you've done more with this than I could ever, so I want you to have it. But yeah, it was just a hobby, hanging out in parks with my friends, which is what Rona kind of feels like. It feels
Mhm.
like high school summer. It's so bizarre. No hours, no jobs, hanging out in
Mhm.
parks. Yeah.
It's so true. So then you went into wedding photography, right? That was your first transition into like actually the world of photography.
Yeah. So this co-op placement that I did out of high school was with, she was more maternity and portrait photographer. So I worked with her for a few years. I was her darkroom tech and I printed everything for her in the darkroom. So back in the good old film days, and learned a lot about black and white from her. And then she moved to a different town. So at 19, I kind of acquired her client list. She referred everyone to me. So I was basically handed a business at 19 years old, which was pretty incredible, like an opportunity that not too many people have. And I had a mentor that kind of helped me through it. So it wasn't necessarily my first choice was the maternity stuff and the weddings, but I also lived in a small town with lots of churches and lots of weddings. Everybody got married in their early 20s, basically, like after high school. So it gave me 10 years to learn how to work efficiently, how to work with every imaginable lighting scenario, and to work in a very celebratory, positive environment where you're working with people on one of the best, happiest days of their life. That was really, I cherish that time. Like, it wasn't my first choice, but it was an incredible experience and taught me a lot.
Wow. So 19, you're handed the business and you're kind of like, oh, gotta figure this out. That's amazing. So because then I feel like you've had quite a few like transition points. And so you were there for about 10 years, right? And then slowly how is it that you landed? Because now you work for the National Ballet of Canada. So how was that transition for you? How's that journey been?
Oh, it was pretty organic. I mean, at the time it felt challenging, but it just felt like 10 years, that's a good amount of time in the wedding industry before you start to feel like you're crashing a little bit, because it is pretty high, especially in Canada where the summers are short. You just end up working constantly all summer. You don't have a life. And I never had like a college life or anything, because I just went from high school to having my own business. So I needed like just a little pause, and decided to see what it would be like to live here. So I just subletted a place for a little while and went back and forth. My husband was still working in Guelph at the time, and just had a summer of hanging out a little bit more and
Good for you,
taking
though,
a
for
little
giving
break.
yourself the time. Yeah.
Yeah, because it felt like I couldn't sustain that level of work, which is funny because now I work more than I ever did. when you feel a bit more passionate about your work, it's a little easier to to keep running on fumes, or you have more fuel than, I guess I should say, than running on fumes. But
that's amazing. So what advice do you have on this concept of recreating, reinventing ourselves?
Mostly just to do it, to try things. You can always go back. There's nothing that's stopping you. And to maybe just ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? And quite often it's you get another job, you go back, or you try something different. And I work with really incredible people that usually have careers until their mid to late 30s as dancers, and then they have to start over again. And so many of them go back to school. I know one dancer who's retiring and going to school for architecture in her mid 30s. And I know dancers that have become lawyers and doctors and all different professions. So they're a really great inspiration for me. And I think for everyone, that you can start a whole new life and career, even in your 30s. And it doesn't have to be this big, scary thing.
Because it's true, the idea of starting over can often feel so overwhelming and so fearful, because we've worked so hard to build up to where we are, and suddenly you have to be like, well, it's over. It's like, and the hardest must be when it's a personal choice to let it go, to be like, I need to move out of here, which is the case in your story. So can you tell us a little bit about your moment of starting over from your business?
I had to find a way to fall in love with photography again, or do something totally different. So that's where it came from. And moved to Toronto, took a bit of a chance there just to be closer to more of a commercial industry, but also the ballet, and to do this personal project to kind of reignite my love for my art form. So yeah, it came from that, and it was definitely a challenging step, but it paid off in the end. So couldn't be happier.
What emotions were you feeling when you were in Toronto, kind of figuring it out?
A lot of excitement, fear, crippling anxiety at times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag, but definitely excitement and just a lot of motivation to do something because I knew I couldn't keep doing the thing. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, really trying to take advantage of a time of change and really explore as much as I could.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that this period of transition was as scary or as bad as you had imagined it to be, or vice versa?
I had a therapist at the time that said something
Mm-hmm.
along those lines, and afterwards, because I just needed some guidance in this transition as well, and afterwards, he also said, "I can't believe you pulled this off. I'm so proud of you." And I thought it was the stupidest choice that you could possibly make. So that was encouraging, not
Mm-hmm.
knowing that he thought that at the time. Yeah, because I left a career that was very successful and was doing very well to do
Mm-hmm.
something that was very unknown and generally not successful for anyone. So
It's true because a lot of people don't go into photography as a result of their fear of not succeeding or not making it out as a photographer in the industry.
it feels like I'm at that pivotal point yet again. So it's
Hmm.
definitely like I hit that wall. And it's me. It's not like I could definitely scale back a lot, but it's more my personality and my anxiety about not working. So I just work all the time and
Mm-hmm.
constantly push myself to the max. So that's definitely more on me than.
I wanted to ask you, when you do reach this dream goal, right? And it feels like, oh my God, I'm here. This is awesome. But then, like everything else in life, that feeling fades and something new needs to be born and reinvented and created. So, does it ever make you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this all over again? Or does that idea excite you of like that reinventing even once again?
It's actually really exciting, especially since
Mm-hmm.
being through it once in the recent past few years. It does feel like it was such an incredible time of growth and learning, which is so wonderful. Like when I'm learning things, and it's one of my happiest, most excited, and you just feel like a kid when you're absorbing things, and you just feel differently about life when you've learned something new. You're just like, ah, and I think that's kind of one of the things that I miss from that time. So excited to go back into those channels and learn some new skills and yeah.
It's an interesting balance between being like the professional and then being the student, right?
Yeah, and I think the best thing we can do is just to be students our whole lives and keep
Mm.
learning and never stop that process because, yeah, there's so much to
That's,
explore.
mm-hmm. That's so awesome. Did you ever once regret it? Where you were like, ah, oh,
Nope. Yeah,
amazing.
there wasn't another option. It just,
Mm.
whatever the outcome was, the change had to happen. So it's always, and I mean, the outcome was amazing. So really can't
Yeah.
complain. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it also builds a lot of trust in you, doesn't it? Because you really realize how capable you are.
Yeah, it did take 3 years to be profitable again, which that was a hard, but it like a hard change as a grown woman to be like, okay, starting from scratch, building a client list again, completely different, but definitely worth it. And I feel like now the transition might not be as big. It will just be more of the same, but more refined. And a little bit more choosy about what I do and what projects I take on.
Wow. So then how is it that you landed at the National Ballet of Canada? Like how was that? So you took a summer or a couple of weeks or maybe even a year in Toronto. And then how did that all kind of like unfold?
I took a summer semi off. I cut down my workload a bit just to try to think and figure things out. and I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I was kind of like definitely burnt out a bit and almost over photography. Just couldn't see my way through like to a happy ending in that career path. And so I just thought if I wanted to do one more project that's just something for me and for no one else with no expectations, it ended up being this little 1 year dance project that was totally a personal project with really no expectations attached to it. And so I was just doing one shoot a week for a year just to see and have something to like keep pushing myself to do it. And then like 6 weeks into that, I think I was photographing through friends of friends, meeting dancers at the National Ballet, and ended up that they were seeing my work and wanted to have a meeting and had me come in and test shoot for them. And the rest is history. Yeah.
Wow. So that transitioned nicely, actually. It wasn't, I love that. I love how like personal projects can sometimes turn into things that, and this is like often where the magic lies, isn't it? Like where you just kind of take it upon yourself to be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to create this, see where it goes. And
yeah, it does. I mean, it sounds pretty charmed sometimes, but at the same time, it was just like, it was a lot of work as well, and definitely a lot of questions about my future while I was doing it. But yeah, it definitely fell into place. And I think if you really, I know like some people will say like, don't say follow your passion or whatever, but I don't believe it. I think totally follow your passion. If it's something that you really love, I mean, who knows what'll happen.
Wow, that's powerful. Did you feel supported during that time? Because you mentioned you were married at that point already.
Yeah, I've been married pretty much my whole adult life. I married my high school sweetheart. So yeah, I was very supportive. And I think we both knew that I couldn't sustain the one career path forever. And it is something that most people do when they're young, is weddings and then move on to other things. So yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, my husband's a saint for putting up with the emotional arty one in the duo.
Like, it's true. So did you ever picture that you'd be sitting where you are, like doing the things that you're doing today? Like, did you ever picture that when you look back?
No, it was always like, I have always dreamed of working for the National Ballet, but it felt like not a possibility, especially when I was going all the time when I was a kid. It just felt like such a distant world, but now it's just life, and yeah, it's wild.
That is so powerful. So I actually want to dive into a little bit more about like the emotional journey a little bit, because naturally, and I think you just shed some light to it, there's like, it seems easy right now, like even just talking about it, but like you said, it's not as simple as it is expressed. So what were your top 2 doubts or concerned as you started this?
Will I ever make money again? Because I was doing really well in wedding photography. But then I think the flip side of that is I always thought you can always go back. You can take a year and you can always go back. It's always an option. Maybe you'll feel differently in a year and want to revisit that career with fresh eyes. So yeah, it's never like irreversible if you dive into something new, which was kind of helpful and like was a nice buffer to the scary times. Sorry.
Yeah, I get it. So do you have a core belief that helped you through it? Like in the times when you were in the thick and like really in the thick of it, what were some of the things you would tell yourself, like to kind of keep going, to keep that motivation, even though you were like concerned about finances and other things?
I pretty much live off of this one Charles Bukowski poem that's like, I used to have memorized. I don't think I remember it anymore, but it was, it's called Roll the Dice. And it's just about going all the way with things. And it's something I would remind myself when I was like, why am I doing this stupid personal project? It's so much work. And yeah, it would keep me rolling for sure.
I can relate to that feeling. Awesome. That's a key lesson. And talking about like believing in yourself, because I really feel like you believed in yourself, like from the beginning, like to have taken on a business at 19 and then completely changed at 29 and just like restart. What would you say around the topic of like believing in yourself, like for someone that's like struggling with that, or perhaps how did you?
I think this goes back to me agreeing to do stuff I'm not qualified to do. I do not believe in myself. I never think I'm going to get through it. I'm just
Serious.
maybe this is a communications issue also. I'm just really bad at saying no to things. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And then being like, how do I do that? So yeah, it's not really confidence. It's more just sheer stupidity.
Or willingness.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But it's true. You know, I think it's Richard Branson. He says, say yes and figure it out later.
Yeah, that's
just say yes.
I don't even know if it's a motto. It's not something I actively try to do. It's just someone asks me something, I'm like, well, yes, of course. And then I'm like, oh, again, do this again.
Oh, that's so funny.
My new motto is say no.
Yeah.
I'm trying
That's
to learn
a tough one though, eh?
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes is good to a certain extent. And then it can also, I guess right now, the new transition for me is to refine the path a little bit more. So.
Saying no has been a tough one for me, so I can relate to it. But also that refinement also allows more creativity and other things to blossom. And throughout this journey, have you had like role models or people that you look up to that you were like always inspired by?
Yeah, definitely. Loads and loads of them all along the way. My parents, for sure, because they were both artists, and I really wanted to make them proud. And in my family, that wasn't being a doctor or a lawyer or anything. It was being an artist. So here we are. And then just loads of photographers, artists, and musicians, and poets and things.
In the process of becoming the woman I see today, like it's been an evolution, of course, but what's the most important thing that you've learned about yourself?
I feel like it's been different things along the way, but most recently is you are who you are. You're not going to change most of that. So I think this is like a 30s thing that happens, but just getting super comfortable being like, here it is. This is what you get, and being okay with that and just embracing that instead of trying to polish her up too much. Yeah.
So actually with that, do you find that the more you become more comfortable and just like, you know, being Caro, the more that shines in your work?
Yeah, I think so, because I'm not as influenced from the outside. Still am, but I don't care as much. I'm more interested in working for myself now instead of for my audience or something. I don't want to churn out the same thing, and I want to explore different things, and it keeps getting darker and moodier, which is kind of where I'm happiest as an artist, and not as colorful and bright, which was definitely not me. It was more like to please a client or an audience. So yeah, it's definitely settling down into something.
Yeah. And it's true, because I recently had a conversation with a woman that said, you know, when you're being paid for something and it's a different kind of art versus like when you're just creating on your own, it's like it's a very different world to be trying to, you know, make a client happy and then at the same time bringing your creative brilliance to the table. So that's it's interesting that you say that.
It's definitely a separation too. Like client work, I have to put in a box of, yes, they're hiring me for me, my aesthetic, my skills, but also that's money, that's job, that's there are other elements, and that's okay. You don't have to be in full creative control all the time.
Yeah.
That's a challenging one. But then my own personal work is definitely like, meh, I don't care what anybody else wants. It's more of a dictatorship.
Well, actually, and you bring up a good point, because feedback, like as I've known a lot of artists, because it is like literally you, as a representation of you is your work, right? Because it's like so personal, it's so beautiful, it's like such a expression. Like, how has your ability to take feedback transition, like from your first work where someone was like, I don't like it, to now when somebody says that and you're like, okay, so, or how is that? How's that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I can be like, yeah, I see your point. I don't agree, but we'll go depending on the job or what's required. Like, just to be able to see other people's perspectives, trust in who I am and my aesthetic, and know that anything visual and artistic is super subjective as well. And our own work is based on a lifetime of experience and who we are as a human being, and everybody comes at things differently and has a different aesthetic and feels and sees different things in work. So yeah, definitely being able to see other people's like perspectives. Chill with that.
And so I'd actually right now, I want to dive into your world, like when you pick up your camera. So you're about to do a shoot, like what does that world look like? Is it like, do you get into a zone? Like, is there something that you do to get into the moment? Do you connect with your camera? Like, what's that world for you? When I'm just so curious, because you know what? I don't know what that's like. So I just picture, and I'm curious what that feels like for you.
For me, nowadays it's very different. It feels, I used to plan a lot. I used to have ideas like written out, and now I try more and more to not think about things and just kind of trust in finding the right ingredients, like a great location, whatever wardrobe, good people, and then just like letting it go and seeing what happens. Because I feel like, especially nowadays with Pinterest and all the things and Instagram, everything's so saturated. And if you let those influences in, you just end up copying yourself or someone else. So I just try to make the right ingredients and then like let it have a life of its own, which is terrifying because I'm not used to working that way. I'm used to being a lot more controlled. So just seeing what happens, and then like really referencing who I'm working with, like who the dancers are or the subject, and trying to feel out how they want to be represented and what really are their strengths to capture. So yeah, it's different. It's terrifying. I'm usually happier with the result though. So getting comfortable with how uncomfortable it is work that way.
What you hope to accomplish with each shot that you take, and you kind of alluded to that at the beginning, which is like to capture some of the essence of what's in front of you. Would you say that, or I'm butchering it? So maybe you could actually let us know.
I think the goal is goosebumps. Like if everyone in the room goes to this place where you just feel like, and I feel like pretty much everyone in the room knows when it just flows and it feels right. And I don't know, I'm a bit of a hippie at heart, but sometimes it just feels like the universe comes together, and when you're in the right place, it just all kind of clicks in, which sometimes it doesn't, and you have to fight it, and you can still get somewhere great, but it feels like when you're in the right place and you've created the right environment, things just kind of come together.
This is fascinating. So when you're capturing the human body and you're in this moment, what opportunities does that present to you by capturing things that are in motion and it's the human body? Like, do you find that there's special opportunities as a result of those two elements that are at play?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I've been doing more video lately because I do have the time to learn new skills right now, and it just feels like you can capture more of that movement. And I still love still photography, especially black and white, but it's nice to explore a new medium and a new way of capturing movement and the body.
Fascinating. Mm-hmm. So then let's dive into this concept of success, because success is often something that we can trip over sometimes because we're kind of like chasing this word. So I'd love to understand, what does success mean to you? Like and do you feel successful? Like, is that how do you feel?
That is a good question. I feel like it comes and goes, and I always have goals that are, whenever I meet them, that ruler keeps going forever. So I don't think I've ever gotten quite to a place that I'm content, but I think it's also shifted as I get older, and now I feel like my new goal is a little more balance rather than the crazy workload that I've been doing. Like I said, it's pretty satisfying having a garden and being like, what, a new flower? You're that happy we did this?
Oh my God, that's how we know we're like reaching a whole other age categories. Like, there's a flower.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And you get excited by like
your
new toaster.
Yeah.
I guess, more nesting and being at home. I never thought, like, I've always traveled and been on an airplane like several times a month. So it's, I'm really shifting how I feel about the world, especially now. I can't travel, so I'm not feeling like I'm missing out.
Yeah, it's true. And would you say success has a specific definition for you? Like, do you relate it to certain things in life, or is it more of a feeling, or how would you define it, I guess?
I think nowadays more as contentment. In the past, it would have been some sort of like achieving a goal or some sort of status or position in your career. But I think now it's more of, that's one version of it, but that's a very one-sided and sometimes quite lacking version. So I think it's a lot more rounded and having different aspects of your life kind of come together instead of just,
Back to your point about the transition of what success has meant, it's also probably shifted how you see your work. So I'd love to understand, why do you do what you do? I'm so fascinated with the reason why people do what they do. So why do you get up in the morning and do this kind of work? What is it about it?
I don't know. I think I started doing it and then it's hard to stop. Or you have jobs and you get up and you just have to do the jobs. Yeah. Sometimes, I definitely love it, but then, you just start doing it and have to keep doing it because people keep hiring you to do it.
Yeah, but it's true. And do you ever see this going somewhere specific, outside of it's been a few years now and sometimes the dream or the vision can evolve over time. Do you see it going somewhere or morphing into something else?
Yeah, definitely more. There are some things I want to learn and some bigger projects that I want to do that I don't think I would have been ready when I was younger to work with crews and different artists of the size and scale that things are becoming lately, which is really nice because that definitely took me a bit to get used to working with and directing so many people. But it's definitely feeling like there are some bigger projects that I'm excited and terrified to do, but here we are.
It's like you said, just say yes and go.
Just put the thing in motion.
That's so awesome. I'm so excited to see what's in store. And I saw your shoot with the TTC, which is the Toronto Transit Commission, for anybody watching this. It's not Toronto based. And that was unreal. So I'm really excited for what's up your sleeve.
That was a fun one. I got to direct a subway, and a few other things.
So just a few last questions actually before we close. And I'd love to know how you take care of yourself. So what do you do during time off? Like now, I guess, or other moments where you've when I need to take care of myself. What do you do?
I've never had time off before, like literally in my grown-up life. Um, so lately it's been a lot of hanging out in parks with friends and watering plants, which has
Okay.
been very soothing. And
Mhm.
yeah, just figuring out how to exercise because I don't. And
I love that. Figuring out how to.
being at home all the time, I'm usually so active. And then I'm like, wow, it's been like 3 days and I've taken like 200 steps total. Really, like,
Kitchen, back. Yeah,
yeah.
I know what you mean. Bedroom, kitchen. Yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah, I
amazing.
think for me, self-care is trying to figure out how to self-care because
Mhm.
how does
Hey,
one
but
do
that's
this?
good. That's good. It's a step in the right direction, I guess. I guess this COVID has helped you with making that more of a priority.
Yeah.
So this is nice. It's
And I
great.
think I might have mentioned this the last time we talked, but it actually felt like I was ready to take another substantial chunk of time off. So
Mm.
this happened right around that time, which is kind of incredible because I do have this like go, go, go energy and I have a very hard time even taking like a weekend off and I just think I'll never work again. So it has been like very peaceful to just be like, you can't work. So
Yeah. I'll take it. Yeah, that's
yeah,
awesome. What's one thing you would encourage women to do for themselves?
not be afraid to take on jobs that they're afraid to take on.
Mm.
Just, yeah, back to saying yes to things because I do have a lot of female friends that will struggle with things that they don't feel qualified for. And I know that's more of a masculine thing usually to jump in and say, yeah, sure, I'll do this. So I feel like that little push for ourselves because we are so much more capable than we give ourselves credit for and so
Mm.
resilient and definitely can learn fast on the fly and
What would you say to anyone that's thinking about starting over?
do the thing.
Yeah. Just get out. Yeah.
Yep.
Do it.
Just do the thing. What's the worst that could happen?
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice that was given to you?
um, so many, but I think one that stuck with me since I think I was like 15 or 16 was to be good or be happy and good things will follow. And I feel like that means so many things to me, like in the moment you can change your attitude and have a more positive outcome and be more kind to yourself and other people, but also to take care of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
um, to make sure that you're in a good headspace. And so much more falls into place for me when I'm in that happy place.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay. So, before we close, is there anything that you'd like to mention that I didn't bring up before we close? Any parting word of wisdom, or are we good? How are you feeling?
Good. I feel like we covered some good ground.
That's awesome.
Some comments before, but now I forgot.
Later, you're going to be like, oh, that was it. Yeah.
I know, right?
So thank you, Carol, for being here with us. It was truly, truly, truly a pleasure and such an honor for you to share this with us and taking us into your life and into your past. So thank you so much for shedding light on that. I'm truly excited for what's to come for you and to continue following your journey. And I will include all the details in the notes below. So
Thank you so
until
much.
next time, yeah, thank
Yeah, thank
you.
you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.